Hello everyone, welcome to Gardening TLC. I am Michelle and today we're going to talk about 10 simple but really important tips that will actually help you avoid some of the common pitfalls that people make in their garden. My goal today is to set you up for success. How many of you have plants that you wish grew better in the garden or you're just not sure how to keep them healthy? Well, today I'm going to show you what works, set you up for success, and give you some tips that are going to help you improve your gardening skills and your garden. So stick around today. Your plants will love you. So as you guys know, I've been gardening for a long time. In fact, I've been gardening my whole entire life. I started gardening when I was a little kid because my dad always had a really big garden in the backyard and I used to sit out there and snap beans. And then I kind of got into it as a hobby and then I got into it as a profession. So for me, gardening is kind of just part of the rhythm of my life because I do it all the time. Now, I live in Northern Illinois Zone 5, and today we are going to talk about some of the most common pitfalls that I see out there, or it's kind of like a lot of the questions that I get asked from customers who come into the garden center, or if I'm asked to do a presentation for like a garden club. This will be some of the topics that I talk about. It's also those things that when I go back and I think about when I was a beginner gardener, I wish I had known these things, or I wish somebody had told me about them, because I can remember doing the whole go to the garden center and walking around and buying plants, taking them home, and I bought all the pretty things that I thought were beautiful. Then I would walk around my yard and I would look for a hole that I needed to fill, and I would plop that plant right down in that hole and then be all angry when it didn't do what I wanted it to do, because I certainly didn't read the tag. I was just looking to fill a hole and I would put it in the ground. Or the shrub grew bigger than I wanted it to and then I'd try to force it to be smaller. I made all of those mistakes. So today, let's give you 10 tips on things to avoid in the garden so that you don't do what I did and learn the hard way. So let's jump right in. We are going to start with number one right here with a hardiness zone map, because the number one thing that I see is that we don't plant things for the area that we live in. And especially when we're looking at those beautiful catalogs that you get in the mail, and they don't always put the zones in, and then we buy something and we live in a zone 5 and we try to grow a zone 6, or we live in a zone 10 and we try to grow a zone 5. It just doesn't work out for us. So what is the hardiness zone map? Where does it come from and why do we need to use it? We'll get right back to the USDA chart, but did you know that most larger countries and regions of the world, they have their own version of a hardiness map? Australia, New Zealand, they are regions that will probably go off the USDA chart, but then when you look at Europe, they're warmer than we are here, so they're going to use a different chart. Okay, let's see how simple I can make this and still make sense. The hardiness zone was created by the United States Department of Agriculture. It's broken up into 13 zones, with 1 being the coldest and 13 being the warmest. They are broke up into 10-degree increments. So for every zone that you go up from 1 down to 13, there's a 10-degree difference between each zone. They are further broken up into A and B. So for example, I live in zone 5. I have zone 5A and zone 5B. So instead of there being 10-degree increments between 5 and 6, 5A and 5B breaks it down into 5-degree increments between 5A and 5B. But what does all that mean? Well, basically what they do is over a 30-year period of time, they take the average coldest temperatures. So not the very coldest that we've ever had ever. They take the average of the coldest temperatures and then they create what is the temperature that your plants can survive in the cold of winter. That is what determines the zone that you live in. So in 2021 and 2022, they started changing the zones based on the last 30 years of information, and they based that on averages. It's not based on the most extreme lowest temperature that you ever had. So absolutely, we could have a crazy winter someplace that is lower in temperature than your average, and it could take out things that they say grow in your zone. So you have to be careful, because that can happen, and it probably will happen, because Mother Nature is Mother Nature. Now, if you want exact information about your zone and where you live, you can pull up the USDA maps, and I put a link down below so you can do that. And then see right up here, you just plug in your zip code, and then it'll give you the information about your averages, your lows, and the zone that you live in. Now you can actually go a little bit further, and you can type in your address and then hit zoom in. It'll zoom right in to the color of the zone that you live in, right where your address is. If you don't live in the United States, you can certainly pull up the zone map for where you live. Here's one for Canada. And then you can see one here for Australia. And then here's another one for Europe. So even though some of the cities in Europe, though, are on the same latitude as some of the cities in the United States, their weather is different than ours based on other factors over there and the landmass and just everything that's going on over there versus what's going on over here. So just because you might be on the same latitude, you might not be the same zone. So make sure you look those up. So in a nutshell, you need to plant for the zone that you live in and not try to grow things that don't grow where you live. You might get away with it for a couple seasons if you have a mild winter, like if you live in the north, but eventually you're going to get that winter that's going to take it out. And if you live in the south, you might try to grow something that's for the north. And a lot of plants, they need to go through that cold cycle to be able to thrive and grow. And if you don't have that in the south, well, you're going to do the same thing. They might last a couple years, but sooner or later they're going to decline, and then you're probably going to lose the plant. So why would you ever put yourself through that? Just plant the right plants for the zone you live in. You want your plants to grow well in the garden? Well, don't place them in the wrong spot. It's one of the bigger mistakes that I see people do. It might sound simple, but it makes a huge difference. There's three main things your plant needs: soil, light, and moisture. First, let's talk about soil. Different plants like different kinds of soil. Some plants like succulents, they need soil that drains really well. Basically, I need that water to flow through really super easy. They don't like to sit in water. Then there's plants like ferns. They want lots of water. So you need to know what kind of soil to plant your plants in. That's super important. Oh, and then there's light. So some plants need more light than others. You've got sun-loving plants that want 6 hours or more of light. Then you've got part sun plants, which means part sun, they can probably handle a little bit more of the afternoon sun, and they need 4 to 6 hours of sun. But then you've got part shade. Well, part shade is more like morning sun, but it still needs 4 to 6 hours of sun because morning sun isn't as hot as afternoon sun. And then you've got full shade, and that's something that's going to grow between 2 and 4 hours. So you got to make sure you know your light so that you know what kind of sun your plants need. Finally, let's talk about moisture. Some plants like to have a lot of water. Some plants don't like water at all. You need to know this information because you'll either overlove it or you'll underlove it if you don't know the watering requirements. So don't put your plants in the wrong place. The key is to match your plants with the right soil, the right light, and the right moisture. You learn a lot of that information by doing homework, watching videos, reading your tags, and talking to other gardeners. Number 3 is improving your watering techniques. I know it's easy to think that all you need to do is go out there and give them a drink when they look thirsty, but there's actually a better way so that your plants get the right amount of water. Whether you're going to water by hand, you're going to use a sprinkler system, or you're going to use an overhead sprinkler, or even a drip system, you need to focus on deep watering. Deep watering promotes deep roots. Shallow watering, that's just not going to cut it. It's going to actually promote a really super weak plant with weak roots. You want to encourage those roots to grow really deep. This is also what's going to make your plant drought tolerant. So make sure that you water deeply less often. Your plants need 1 to 2 inches of water every single week to thrive. You want to find out how much 1 inch of water is by taking a Tupperware dish out to your garden, setting it in there, turn your sprinkler on, and go out like every 15 or 20 minutes and see how long it takes to get 1 inch of water in that dish. Now you know how long to water. The other thing is timing is important. Watering in the morning, that's your sweet spot. You don't want to put your plants to bed wet. That invites foliar disease. So do it in the morning. Well, it just so happens that I have a video about watering, and you can go check that out. It's called Best Watering Practices for Excellent Results. I have linked it down below. And if you want more information, more detailed information about watering, I highly recommend you go check this video out. I think we're on number 4. Okay, number 4 is over-fertilizing. Let's dive into another way to improve your gardening routine. Avoid the trap of over-fertilizing because we think that more fertilizer will make it grow better. It might seem like that would be the case, but really too much fertilizer can actually cause harm to your plants. So, why is fertilizer important? Well, it does provide essential nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and your plants all need those things to grow healthy and strong. But if you give your plants too much, it can actually stress them out. So, over fertilizing can burn the roots, it can make the soil too acidic, it can actually prevent your plant from absorbing water properly because it binds up the nutrients. So, you don't want to over fertilize. So, how do you avoid over fertilizing? Well, it's pretty simple and it's not rocket science. You read the label, and if the label recommends to use a certain amount, use that amount. If it says dilute it, dilute it. Follow the label. Well, of course, I have a video about fertilizer. It's a little shorty. It's called The Dirt, which is all just facts about fertilizer. So you can learn about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and what they're for. You could go check it out. It's like 5 minutes long. Number 5 is prepping your soil and getting it ready for planting. This is a step nobody likes to do because it can be hard work, but you don't want to skip it. Healthy soil is the foundation for healthy plants. If your soil isn't ready, your plants won't have the nutrients, the structure, or the drainage they need. Before you even think about planting, you need to get your soil ready. A good place to start is testing your soil. If you've never done that before, or you're on a new property, or you're starting a new garden, it's a really good place to start out. You can actually buy soil test kits, or I like to use the ones that you get from the extension offices because they send them out to a lab and they have great instructions on the proper way to take a soil test for your garden. This is going to give you a very clear idea of what your soil needs are. If your soil is too acidic or it's too alkaline, it's going to tell you what amendments to add to get it to the pH that it needs to be. So this is a great idea to do. Add compost to your garden. It is the number one thing that you will do in your garden that will improve your soil and make everything in your garden grow better. So whether you're using compost that you've made yourself, you're buying compost, it doesn't really matter what kind you use, whether it's yard waste, mushroom, manure compost, it's whatever you prefer to use. Find something and work it into the soil. It will definitely change the way the things grow in your garden. If you have heavy clay, it's going to improve the soil so that it drains better, it gives more air, aerates it up a little bit. If you have sandy soil and all the nutrients and water are flowing through it, compost is going to help hold all of that together. So if you can backfill a hole and mix native soil with compost, do it. If you can top dress with compost, do it. If you can work it into a new garden, do it. It's the best thing you'll ever do for your soil health. Number 6 on my list is improper spacing. This is where if you're a plopper, like I used to be back in the day, where you would walk around your garden, look for a hole and plop it in the ground and hope it did what you wanted it to do. And then it was either too small, too big, didn't grow, whatever. Well, proper spacing is pretty important. You do not want to cram a shrub into an area where it doesn't have enough room to grow. You also want to make sure that you've got good airflow around your plants so that they don't get fungal diseases, right? Yeah, we don't want that. So proper spacing is really important. So first off, your plants need space for the roots to spread out a little bit. They don't want to be all crammed in there. When plants are spaced too closely together, their roots are now going to compete for water, nutrients, oxygen, and that can stunt their growth. Not only does this cause your plants to struggle, but it can, again, lead to those diseases because we have overcrowding. We have a tendency to hold on to all the moisture that's in there. There's not good airflow, and then you get mold and mildew, and just space them properly. How do I know how to space them? Oh, we're going to go back to read the tag. Tip number 7 is making sure that you plant your plants at the right depth. If you plant them too deep, they actually struggle getting oxygen, which can stunt their growth. And you can also have root rot that way. On the flip side, if you plant them too shallow, then they don't anchor in because all the roots are on the surface and winds and other environmental factors, bloop, will knock them over. So how deep should you plant? Well, a good rule of thumb is to plant shrubs, trees, and perennials at the same depth that they were in a pot. When you're planting a tree, you want to make sure that you can see that root flare right at the soil level. As you can see here, here's a picture of kind of what that looks like. As that's flaring out, you want to be able to have that above the surface. And remember, you're putting like 2 inches of mulch around this as well, so keep that in mind. You also want to make sure that when you're backfilling, you tamp that in really good. And whether you're using all native soil or a mix of native soil and compost, Make sure you're tamping that in well to get good root to soil contact, and make sure you get all the air pockets out by watering them in. My number 8 tip is making sure that you plant things at the right time. An example of this would be fall bulbs, like your tulips and your daffodils, and all of those beautiful spring bloomers that we get early in the spring. All of those have to go through cold stratification, which means they need anywhere from 8 to 16 hours, depending on the plant, of cold before they will actually sprout up out of the ground. So these are planted in the fall. The same thing holds true when you're planting some of your vegetables or your herbs or your seeds. Some flowering seeds need to go through that cold stratification, and that means they have to have a period of cold before that they'll actually like germinate up in the ground. So you want to make sure you know that when you're planting different things and you're planting things at the right time. The other thing holds true for herbs and vegetables. There are cool season herbs, which grow when it's cool out, and then you have warm season herbs, and they won't grow or even start growing, and you can't even plant them until the ground warms up. And so you want to make sure you know what those are as well. Number 9 on my list is pretty important because it's about not planting invasive species. Invasive species can crowd out native plants. They disrupt wildlife. They damage the soil. They grow faster than the native plants. There's not a lot of things like diseases or pests to keep them in check. So the next thing you know, they've taken over the whole ecosystem. So you want to make sure you're not planting those. The USDA has a list of invasive species. It's pretty extensive. I've put the link down below. So if you don't know whether or not it's an invasive species, you can go check it out on this list. Now, most reputable places are not going to be selling these kinds of plants, but you could probably pick one up innocently at a plant swap from somebody, and maybe you don't know what you're planting. So make sure you check that out. All right, we made it to number 10, and number 10 on my list is making sure that you have good pruning techniques. Now, you probably can't take out a lot of plants by improper pruning, but you can certainly make them look bad. You can make them grow wonky. And yes, you can kill them in some instances. So if you don't know how to prune, get educated or hire a professional. I do have a video about pruning, and if you want to check that out, I think I just did it last week, so you could go check that out. I linked that one below as well. Well, that's a wrap for today. Hopefully you guys learned something, but now you know 10 of the most common pitfalls that I have seen people do in the garden and I have done myself. You know, gardening's a journey. It's not all of a sudden I know everything about gardening. And the biggest learning I've ever done is when I either taught it to someone else or I made a mistake in the garden and I learned from it. It's not about being perfect in the garden. You're never going to have a perfect garden because you're dealing with Mother Nature. But what it really is it's about consistency. It's about learning as you go. Whether it's watering correctly or giving your plants enough space, if you take some of the things that I talked about today and apply them in your garden, you will see results and you will see improvement and confidence in your gardening skills. So thanks so much for watching today. And if you have questions or you want to drop a comment below, please do so. And if you like our videos, subscribe. I am Michelle. I hope you enjoyed today. We will see you in the next video, and let's just keep growing together. See you later. Bye.